From MTN News, welcome to America Votes, Montana's race for the U.S. Senate.
Good evening and thanks for joining us for part two of our special coverage previewing the 2024 election. I'm Tim McGonigal. We're coming to you once again tonight from our MTN studios in Great Falls. Now, this is where we had planned to host a debate between Senator Jon Tester and his opponent Tim Sheehy. Now, political debates are a tradition MTN takes seriously, and we've held them for all major statewide races for at least the past 30 years. But this year is an exception. Senator Tester accepted our invitation to debate. Tim Sheehy did not. His campaign declined our invitation, providing little explanation. We then requested to sit down with both candidates for 30 minutes to talk about their visions for Montana and their political records. Again, Senator Tester accepted the invitation. Tim Sheehy declined. Both campaigns understood this special would happen even if one candidate chose not to participate. So tonight, we will do our best to introduce you to both candidates and where they stand on important issues as we count down the days to November 5th. First tonight, our Andrea Lutz introduces us to Jon Tester, a three-term Democrat from Big Sandy fighting to hold on to his Senate seat.
I asked you a direct question on whether this budget was up or down, and you would not answer it. You refused to answer it. That is totally unacceptable.
Before Jon Tester became entrenched in the U.S. Senate, one of the most senior senators in Congress, we all knew him as a third-generation dirt farmer.
Yeah, we're just starting the planning.
Like most farmers, one of his biggest concerns each year is his crops. This was back in 2018, a glimpse at the senator at work on the farm.
We'll get done with this probably tomorrow, and then we'll start on the grain.
Back then, it was a tough race for Tester, too, defending his seat against Matt Rosendale.
Some people would say, well, geez, are you concerned about the election? We knew it was going to be a tough election. This all was going to happen regardless.
Tester was born in Havre, grew up on the land his grandparents homesteaded, and we all know he's the only member of Congress just shy of all 10 fingers after losing 3 on his left hand in a meat grinder accident when he was just 10 years old. He excelled on the basketball court and met his wife Charlotte at church. Tester says she struck him out during a youth game of softball.
Charlotte and I this year will be celebrating our 47th wedding anniversary.
They raised their 3 now adult children on their Big Sandy farm, but agriculture isn't the only career Tester is known. After graduating with a music degree from what was then the College of Great Falls, he worked for 2 years as an elementary music teacher in Big Sandy, even serving on the school board.
There's 2 things that made this thing great: public education, foundation of our democracy.
After a stint in the Montana legislature, Tester was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006, and he's never looked back.
Look, we did it.
Although he's perhaps now fighting the biggest battle of his political career. Recent polls show the 3-term senator trailing his opponent, Tim Sheehy, by a growing margin. Tester's opponents over the years, including Sheehy, are quick to highlight just how much money the Democrat has received from lobbyists. Until recently, Tester ranked first among U.S. lawmakers in lobbyist contributions. He's currently the only Democrat still holding statewide office in Montana.
First of all, I'm a Montanan, and I love this state, and I love the people of this state.
So it's perhaps no surprise he's had to walk a fine line in a predominantly red state, most recently refusing to endorse the Democratic presidential nominee, Kamala Harris.
Whoever gets elected to the U.S. presidents, I can guarantee you one thing: just like all previous ones, I'll work with them when they're doing good things for Montana, and I'll hold them accountable when they're not.
Regardless, he vows to keep fighting for all Montanans.
When you're thinking about giving your kids opportunity,
Tackling issues he says are on the minds of voters, including the housing crisis, immigration, threats to public lands, and health care.
it's pretty damn important we have Medicare.
Tester has been a crusader for veterans in Montana and across the country.
When it comes to working for veterans, I won't take a back seat to anybody.
As the ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, Tester says one of his proudest pieces of legislation is the PACT Act, and opening 12 new veterans clinics across Montana. And cashing in this election cycle on an issue in front of voters about abortion and reproductive rights being enshrined in the Montana Constitution. All of this while continuing to rock his trademark $12 flat top haircut. It's a look that stuck with him, perhaps a good luck charm, as he hopes to be reelected to Congress again. But no matter what happens this election,
Family farm agriculture, we have fed the world.
Tester got his start right here on this big sandy farm. It's where his roots are planted, where he comes home to Charlotte, and where his Montana values began.
People that know that this state was built by people working together, and that, quite frankly, your handshake means something and your word is your bond.
Senator Jon Tester is the only Democrat currently holding a statewide office in Montana, but it remains to be seen whether that could change come November. He sat down with Andrea Lutz inside our MTN studios in Butte to discuss not only his priorities for the next 6 years, should he be reelected, but also about life after politics.
Senator, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I super appreciate
You
it.
bet.
I do want to start out with just a little bit about your political career. Looking back, you've held office for our state for 18 years,
That's
right?
correct.
And of course, Montana is a predominantly red state.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about why you're continuing to do this. Do you feel as enthusiastic about this as you did back when you first won?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I'm a Montanan, and I love this state, and I love the people of this state. I think this is the greatest state and the greatest country that's ever existed on earth. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened by people in governmental levels, whether that's at the state or the federal level, that understood this was a great state and wanted to keep it this way, whether it was in public lands or whether it's in healthcare, whether it's a woman's right to choose. The list is long. I've got some seniority in the Senate. The Senate is based on seniority. I'm able to get some things done that can really help this state and move this state forward economically. And we're going to continue to do that. But the bottom line why I'm running again is because I love this state. I want my kids and my grandkids to have the same kind of opportunity that my parents and grandparents gave me.
People tend to frown upon the term career politician.
Yeah.
And you beat Conrad
I do too,
Burns
by the way.
after 18 years when he was in service.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you've become a career politician?
No, I really don't, because I've continued to have a real job. I'm the only one in the Senate that has a real job outside being a United States Senator, and that's I'm a farmer. And Charlotte and I are very, very lucky. We get to farm the land that my grandparents homesteaded back in 1910 that my folks took over in the 40s, and that we took over from them in the late 70s. And I look forward to the day when I can retire from farming. I've got a grandkid that's senior in high school, and if all things work out well and I can get him to come to college here in the Treasure State, I think he'll be taking the farm over, and that'll be a very, very good thing for me. And the family, because it'll be the next generation on the farm. But no, the reason is because I've been able to stay grounded because of my work in production agriculture. It's my first love, short of my wife. It's my first love, and it's something that I've wanted to do since I was 8 years old, and continue to do it to this day.
Yeah. Is it fair to say farmer first, senator second?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a good thing to put on my tombstone.
It's okay. Polls. We want to talk about the polls a little bit.
Sure.
They do show your Republican opponent is
Sure.
widening that gap a little bit. Are you worried about that?
I've had tough races every time I've run. If I'd have talked to you, Andrea, 2 years ago, I'd have said this is going to be a tough race, or a year and a half ago, this is a tough race. It's going to be a tough race. It's going to require us to do an all-out effort, not make any mistakes, move forward in a way that Montanans understand what I've done for them and what I'm going to do for them moving forward if they give me another 6 years. And in the end, I think we'll win, because I think Montanans understand how important it is to have good, solid representation that understand rural America and understand Montana values back in Washington, D.C.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit and ask about Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yes.
In 2020, you did endorse her as the VP for President Biden. In
Sure.
fact, I found a tweet that said she's a proven fighter that you put
Yeah.
out. Why are you not choosing to endorse her now?
Because I'm up for election, and I want this race to be about Montana. I don't want it to be about the presidential race. They can fight their own presidential battles. The fact is I don't care who gets elected to the presidency. I'm going to be able to work with them. We'll push back on them when it isn't good for Montana, and we'll work with them when it's good for Montana. But I don't want this race to be about talking about who the next president's going to be. I want this race to talk about whether a woman's going to have a right to choose, whether we're going to continue to have public lands in this state, whether we're going to continue to have access to health care in the most frontier areas of our state. So that's what I want to talk about, when in fact folks have been trying to nationalize this, and they continue to try to nationalize this race, and to some extent they've been successful in that. The truth is this race isn't about the presidential. This race is about Montana and who the Montanans want representing them and their values back in Washington, D.C.
You know, we have heard, though, from some Montana Democrats who have said and have expressed that perhaps maybe you are taking their votes for granted because it seems like with your campaign strategy, you've taken a more moderate side. How do you respond to that?
I'm a Montanan. Montanan's a moderate state. Montana was built by people working together, not through division, but by working together. I think it's the same thing in government. I'm one of the most effective senators in the United States Senate, one of the most bipartisan senators in the United States Senate. That's just a fact. And I'm going to continue to work and do best by Montana. I'm not extreme on the left. I'm not extreme on the right. I'm right down the middle. And I continue to do things to help working families, to help small businesses, to help family farm agriculture, to keep this country strong militarily, and to take care of our veterans when we get back home. That's who I am, and that's what I'll continue to be.
Do you think it's harder to campaign and be a Democrat in a predominantly red state?
I've never lived anywhere else. I never have. This is, you know, I've basically lived 100 miles from where I was born my entire life. This is all I know. So whether it was my days on the school board or my days in the state legislature or my days in the U.S. Senate, Montana's about hard work. I mean, we're sitting in Butte, America right now. This town's about hard work, and so is the whole state. And so I'm accustomed to hard work, and you just roll up your sleeves, you get the job done. That's what we do in this state.
I do want to ask you about some of the issues that you obviously feel very passionate about. Let's start with the Farm Bill.
Sure.
You, again, have said that you are the only working farmer.
Yep.
You take that very seriously. It's very near and dear to you, but we have not had a Farm Bill.
That's
now.
right.
So where are we at on this, and are you taking the leadership role
So
on it?
everything gets tied up in politics in Washington, D.C. It's unfortunate, but until we get the money out of politics, this is the way it is, and I think we need to get the money out of politics, and I got some bills to do that. But that aside, it's really important we get a farm bill for certainty's sake. You know, farmers struggle with markets, they struggle with input costs, they struggle with weather. The Farm Bill is about the only thing of certainty that they have to deal with. And look, it's tied up with SNAP benefits right now and reference prices. All this stuff can be worked out, but you got to have people at the table that want to get it worked out. Right now, it's politics all the time. I anticipate we'll get a Farm Bill done during the lame duck, the time between the election and when the next Congress starts, because the crazy season of the election will be over, and people will stop saying, well, who gets an advantage if we pass a Farm Bill? Does this party get an advantage or that party? The fact is food security is really, really important. Family farm agriculture is really, really important. We need to get a Farm Bill done. I have been working hard. I do not sit on the Ag Committee, believe it or not, the only actively engaged farmer in the Senate, and I'm not on the Ag Committee, but that doesn't matter. We continue to put pressure on Stabenow and Bozeman to try to get this Farm Bill done, and we'll continue to do that moving forward. By the way, that's the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee.
Does it give you some heartache that you don't sit on the Ag Committee to really, I mean, as a position that you're in?
So I've got 5 really, really good committees, and I would love to be on Ag, but at some point in time, there's a limit to the number of committees you can sit on. But what I do is, as I continue to educate people in Washington, D.C. about the challenges of production agriculture and try to push forward with a Farm Bill that meets the needs of our folks that are in production agriculture. Look, it used to be the entire Senate was farmers almost. Now they're few and far between. I think that's unfortunate. But the truth is that agriculture is still the #1 industry in Montana. Having a Farm Bill is really critically important to make sure that those farmers have certainty moving forward.
So we already know where you stand on abortion rights and reproductive
Yep.
rights. You and I have had this conversation before. I've asked you these questions.
Yes.
But what I do want to ask you about this is, do you support it being restored at a national level, or do you think that there is some strength in the issue going to the states?
I do not think there's any strength of it going to the states. I think that Roe v. Wade needs to be restored at the national level. It's been there my entire adult life until it was thrown out with the Dobbs decision, the biggest reduction of freedom in my lifetime. These are very difficult decisions. They're complex decisions. They're decisions that shouldn't be made by a U.S. senator or a judge or a bureaucrat. They need to be made by the woman and their doctor. That's fundamentally where I'm at, have been. That's fundamentally where I'm at. I think it's just critically important.
Okay. Do you think that campaign-wise there is a measure on the ballot for November that inevitably will bring out people to vote for? And when they see that there's a Democrat also running, campaign strategy-wise, do you feel like that's going to help you?
So what I've talked about is I think it's important CI 128 passes. I support it. I think it's the right thing to do, but it's the people of Montana's decision. But I don't know if it's going to make a big difference in the race. It could. I hope it does, because I think freedom is important to Montanans. And I don't think Montanans want the federal government or the state government telling them how to make healthcare decisions. And so I think it's going to have some impacts. Whether it's an impact that will put me over the top or would make a difference if I was going to win anyway, I can't tell. You just never know.
I want to ask you a little bit about some of the energy jobs that we've seen.
Yes.
Sibanye Stillwater, 700
Yes.
laid off.
Yep.
Pyramid closed its Sealy location after 75 years.
Yep.
The question always goes back to Colstrip.
Yep.
And we've seen some EPA rulings come in.
Yep.
What do you think the plan is for Colstrip?
So I pushed back on those EPA rulings because I think they single out one plant in the United States, and I don't think that's the right thing to do for the federal government. It shows you how this one-size-fits-all can have some real negative impacts. I think Colstrip's going to continue to be a player in energy for my lifetime and beyond. The coal plants there, we're pushing to try to keep them open to 2035. I think that's about the end of their life cycle. But I'm going to tell you, things have come forth in the nuclear era that is really quite positive. I've never been a big fan of nuclear power, but I have been because the technology is caught up to make sure that we don't add to the nuclear waste that's out there. And I think it's a real net positive. And I think moving forward, and I've been talking to companies that make energy, that generate electricity, that are in the nuclear business about taking a look at Colstrip. We're just investing about $700 million into a tie line that goes east. So now not only does Colstrip go west, it's going to go east too through the infrastructure bill that I wrote. And I think Colstrip is set up in great shape to continue generation like they have in the past. It may be with nuke instead of coal moving forward. Who knows though? There's technology improving in coal too. It may end up being in coal too. But the truth is that we need to continue to make efforts to try to reduce the amount of CO2 that's going in the atmosphere for climate change purposes. We can see what's gone on in Florida in the last few days. It's a huge issue. And by the way, from a fiscally responsible standpoint, with the amount of disasters that's out there, Colstrip needs to continue to be a player, but we need to do it right.
It's so funny that you bring up nuclear. It's so expensive though to get going, and we've seen it happen in Wyoming, but we're seeing a billionaire back it. So how do we make that transition? How do we afford that?
So I think that we saw a plant down in Georgia just open up that's huge. I've been talking with the Southern company that's built that plant. You're right, we're seeing some stuff in Wyoming going on. Look, I think that there's always opportunities out there to help promote different energy sources, and I think this is an opportunity to help promote it, moving it forward. And look, this isn't something that's going to be online for a week or a year or 10 years. This is a long-term investment that's going to pay back over the long term, just like coal.
Let's talk about the border a little bit. Your opponent calls your policies on the border radical, but we do know that you did vote for the bipartisan border bill. You and I had that conversation.
For sure.
It still failed. So we've also seen the impacts from the border here in Montana. We've seen the fentanyl seizures just skyrocketed. We've seen it in Billings. It's very near and dear to us in Billings. We've seen it in our tribal communities. So what is the issue at the border? I mean, and do you really feel like there is a path to amnesty for some of our...
No, there is not a path to amnesty. I do believe that, and I've never voted for a path for amnesty. I think that just like, unless you're Native American, just like our ancestors did, you get in line, you follow the law, you pay your taxes, you learn the language, and then, if you meet those criteria, you're possibly become a U.S. citizen. Look, the border's a political football right now. The reason that bill passed, or failed, is because of politics. That's not the way it should be. It shouldn't be about Democrats or Republicans. It should be about Americans. And the border needs to be secure. And I pushed back on the Biden administration many, many times on their policy on the southern border because I believe the southern border needs to be secure. We had a bipartisan bill to do exactly that. By the way, my opponent said he wouldn't vote for it before he even read it because of political pressure. That's not how Montanans expect their senators to act. And he's running for the position, so you need to act appropriately. But the bottom line is this. At this moment in time, it's a political football. And I think probably after the election, that bill that we put up 8 months ago will probably pass. Unfortunately, over the last 8 months, there's been a lot of folks come across the southern border in particular that shouldn't have come across the southern border. The other thing I'll say is this. We're a northern border state. Yeah. People forget about the northern border, but the truth is we need to keep our eyes fixed on both borders. And when you see stuff going on in the southern border, like there was 10,000 people, Customs Border Patrol agents that would have been put on the southern border with that bill, some of those folks would have come to the northern border, and we need them on the northern border too, because the crooks are going to find a way to go through the weakest link in the fence. And if we've got Border Patrol agents there helping us out, it keeps this country safer. Okay. It's critically important for this country.
Yeah. The border it's a tough issue. It's a really tough issue.
Well, it is a tough issue, but like the fentanyl, we had opportunity with that bill to put x-ray machines at the ports. That would have stopped the fentanyl from coming in this country. 10,000 additional folks with technology, tightening the asylum laws, being able to shut the border down if it was overrun. All those things were in that bill, but it got tied up in political baloney, and I'm being kind when I say baloney. It got tied up in Washington, D.C. garbage, and that's not what America needs right now. They need people to work together to make America a better place. China wants to replace us as the world's leading economic power and military power. We need to take their long game plans seriously, and we need to start acting like adults in Washington, D.C.
What do you think your biggest, so cliche, but what do you think your biggest success is? What's the thing that you feel so like that's your glory after 18 years?
I'm very proud of being one of the 10 members, 5 Ds and 5 Rs, that wrote the infrastructure bill. It was the biggest investment in infrastructure since the year I was born, and I think it will provide benefits for generations to come. I'm very, very proud of the fact that I wrote the PACT Act and got it passed amongst the chagrin of a lot of members in the Congress, but our veterans came up and said, we need this. It's the right thing to do. First time ever in this country that we ever took care of the issue of toxic exposure. It's the largest increase of health care and benefits ever in the VA history. I did that. And I think that if you look at the stuff we're doing in health care right now, you know, moving the ball forward, trying to get more residency slots in this state, long term that's going to pay benefits. And we need to continue to work on mental health. You know, Montana continues to lead the nation in suicides. Whether you're a veteran or whether you're a farmer or whether you're a small business owner or whether you're a worker, mental health is really important, and I think it's the biggest healthcare issue this country is going to face over the next 50 years. I will say something moving forward that I think is really, really important that Congress tackles sooner rather than later, and much sooner, is AI. AI can do, artificial intelligence can do a lot of really, really good things, but we got to put some sideboards on it so it doesn't do the really, really bad things, like put watermarks to make sure that people know the difference between the real thing and something that's created by AI. I think that's going to be job one at the beginning of this next Congress.
Is there something that you don't see eye to eye on most Democratic things, and you do align more with Republicans?
Obviously, the Second Amendment to come out first. You know, I mean, I've got more guns than I need and fewer than I want. But the truth is that I think Second Amendment is fundamental to who we are in Montana, to be able to protect ourselves, be able to go hunting. I think the southern border is another one. I pushed back. Talked to Mayorkas many times, who's the head of the Department of Homeland Security, saying, you know, what the hell are you guys doing? And some ideas that they, you know, maybe ought to keep their eye focused on the problem, because it is a problem. If we don't know who's coming across the border, we don't know who's coming across the border. That's a huge challenge.
Let's talk about campaign and,
sure.
and funds and how you raise.
Yeah.
You were the largest recipient.
Yep.
You're like, I know this is coming, Andrea.
No, that's good.
You've now gone to the second highest recipient.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's okay. That's cool.
You've now gone to the second highest, Senator Tester. Republicans contend that over your tenure in the Senate that you have become enmeshed in the same corrupt DC establishments that you wanted to fight against.
Give me one of those Republicans, just one of those Republicans, that will get on my bill to stop corporations from being people, because they're not people. And we're seeing corporations, out-of-state corporations, funnel millions and millions of dollars into the races. Give me one of those, one of the Republicans that are making those claims, that are willing to put caps back on the kind of money that's being spent on these campaigns, so that you would be capped at spending, say, $1,000. Instead, there are no caps. Mm-hmm. And you got folks that got more change in their pocket than I'm worth, quite frankly, that are pumping, once again, millions and millions of dollars into this race. Why? So they can try to influence people to make it a different thing. But let me tell you this. Big Pharma, prime example. I've probably gotten money from Big Pharma. I don't think there's much doubt about that. What did I do? When it came to putting Montana first, I said, you know what? Medicare needs to negotiate prescription drugs. Big Pharma didn't like that, by the way. It's going to save Montanans on some drugs up to 80%. But it wasn't that they funded anything in many of my campaigns. I don't look at that stuff anyway, and I don't care. But the truth is, we need to negotiate prescription drugs. Why? Because they're too doggone expensive, and we need to help out Montana seniors and everybody else too, by the way, because it will help out everybody down the line. Same thing with cap and insulin. That's just one example of many where I'm going to do what's right for Montana first. And it's what I've done every year I've been there. Why? Because I'm a Montanan. When this gig's over with, I'm going to continue to be a Montanan. I'm going to continue to be farming west of Big Sandy. I want our government to work for Montana and for the people of this country.
Do you think that that's all they have? You know, because that's what they use. Or your opponents and Republicans use that a lot. And so you're saying... For
sure, but what I'm saying is this is the landscape. It's like playing football and only having one leg. I mean, it puts you at a big disadvantage. I'm going to do what I need to do to win. This is the field. But I'm going to tell you, I want that field to change. I don't think the voters are better informed when they go to the ballot box because we have unlimited spending on these campaigns. Look, we're in Butte. This is a place where Copper Kings tried to buy U.S. senator seats, okay? Montana led the charge on making sure that we had free, fair, transparent elections. All that was thrown out by the United States Supreme Court. It's time Congress acts and puts it back in, but it has to be done in a bipartisan way, otherwise we'll never get it passed.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible?
I absolutely think it's possible. I think it needs to be a very high priority. I think our democracy depends upon it. Too much money's going into these races.
Let's talk about what you do see for yourself after you're done.
Yeah.
After you decide
Yeah.
or the voters decide, either way.
Either way.
Do you go back to Big Sandy and you continue farming?
You're damn right. No, I'm telling you what. I said this earlier, but I was 8 years old. I got two older brothers. And thank God they went different ways. My oldest brother's a veterinarian. My middle brother spent 35 years in the Air National Guard. And when I was 8 years old, I went up to my dad, before this even happened, and I said, I want to be a farmer. And I was lucky enough that my two older brothers said, we're going a different way. You can have it, son. And I got married, got really lucky and married an incredible woman. And she's been by my side the whole time for 47 years. And we've been on that farm since I graduated from college, and it's what I really love. It's truly what I love. It's something that I get up in the morning and I look forward to. I don't care if it's going out and cleaning out a grain bin or running the tractor or getting some seed cleaned, whatever it might be. I just like that work, and there's a real feeling of accomplishment with farming, with agriculture. Now, does it have its ups and downs? Yeah, when the white combine comes in, a hailstorm, and wipes you out after you spent all year long, and it happens 10 days before that crop's ready to cut, which happened 3 years ago. Wow. Yeah, it kind of takes the gas out of you. But the truth is, I wouldn't change it for any other occupation in the world. You know, we're in the middle of the baseball playoffs, and the baseball players are always saying, you know, I got the greatest job. I get to play baseball. I feel the same way about production agriculture.
Well, you have gotten some things done, though. I mean, would you ever consider serving Montana? Would you ever consider a run for governor?
No. That day has come and passed 20 years ago.
Think so?
When I actually thought about doing that at a moment in time. But no, I've been able to do some good things in the United States Senate, and I did some great things when I was in the state legislature too. And I just, you know, look, if this works out or doesn't work out, if it's this year, if it's 6 years from now, no, I intend fully to go back to the farm and continue. And then I've got to figure out how to wean myself off it once my grandkid takes over. Truthfully.
You have talked a lot about, you know, what you want to see happen
Yeah.
if you're reelected and,
Yeah.
and moving back in.
Yeah.
What do you think that first priority is going to be? Is it the border? Is it the...
Oh, yeah, look, I mean, I hope the border gets done in the lame duck. I hope the farm bill gets done in the lame duck. If it doesn't, those two are top priorities in the next Congress. And then I will tell you that there's some things to do on oversight of the VA and of the infrastructure bill that we need to focus on too. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think we've got to come forth with some really good policies on AI. I am very, very concerned about the direction this headed. And like I said, it can do some great things for humanity, but it can also destroy humanity. And I don't want the latter, I want the former. So Congress needs to get educated, and myself included, and move forward with some good policies to put some sideboards around AI.
Senator, thank you.
You bet. Pleasure to meet. Pleasure to visit with you, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Tester is no stranger to Montana politics, but his opponent in this race is new to the political scene. Tim Sheehy is a Bozeman businessman who certainly has an impressive resume. The father of 4 served as a Navy SEAL and also an aerial firefighter. MTN's Andrea Lutz has more on the Republican hoping to launch a new career as Montana's next senator.
And I'm running because I'm very concerned about the direction of this nation.
Tim Sheehy is a newcomer to Montana politics, but by now you've no doubt heard a lot about him.
When I understood that the control of the United States Senate came down to this seat, it was clear that my new path to serve this country was in the U.S. Senate.
Sheehy grew up in a Minneapolis suburb. He stayed close to home, graduating from St. Paul Academy, a private prep school, in 2004.
When I was 18, I was carrying a gun in defense of this country.
He enlisted in the Navy and moved away from home. Sheehy became a Navy SEAL and served in Iraq and Afghanistan, even earning a Purple Heart.
You learn a lot in military service. You learn the power and the greatness of this nation.
And it's the military where Sheehy met his wife, Carmen.
We came home to live the American dream in Montana.
In 2014, the two decided to make Montana home, raising their 4 children on their 20,000-acre cattle ranch in the Gallatin Valley.
I love my 4 children. I want to raise them in the greatest state in the greatest country. We've invested in growing our business here.
That business is Bridger Aerospace, an aerial firefighting company. Sheehy started the company in 2014, even piloting missions himself, battling devastating wildfires across the American West. Those firefights have perhaps helped prepare him for this political battle.
Jon Tester doesn't represent Montanans. He's a rubber stamp for Biden's failed presidency and extreme liberal agenda, and it's time to retire them both.
It's a race that many believe could determine which party has control over the U.S. Senate.
Hugely positive vibes. You can feel the momentum.
In fact, the stakes are so high, former President Donald Trump visited Montana this summer to campaign on Sheehy's behalf.
I gotta like Tim Sheehy a lot to be here, I have to.
There are clear differences between Sheehy and his Democratic opponent. Perhaps none are more apparent than their stance on abortion rights.
And I'll not apologize for wanting to protect the life of an unborn child.
Sheehy says as a father of 4, he's pro-life. And he says he stands in strong support for IVF and is proud to have helped pay for a state-of-the-art NICU facility at Bozeman Health. He claims Democrats are pushing the most extreme abortion plan in the world.
My position on abortion has been common sense. I support the exceptions, rape, incest, life of the mother. But at some point when there's a viable life, another viable life included, that life also has the right to protection.
Another topic Sheehy feels strongly about, the southern border.
The fentanyl coming into this country is devastating our rural communities. It's devastating our cities and our tribal communities all across the nation, but especially here in Montana.
Sheehy is critical on the Biden administration and his opponent. He supports finishing the wall and putting an end to illegal immigration once and for all.
The flow of fentanyl across the border has something to do with legal immigration. Also has a lot to do with illegal immigration.
Sheehy says he wants to protect against a radical agenda that threatens the Second Amendment. And he believes spending in Washington, D.C. is out of control and believes our country's healthcare system is broken because of Obamacare.
It's time to actually solve these problems and stop talking about them.
Sheehy says it's time for a new generation of leadership.
The truth is, I'm concerned about where our country's heading, and I think it's time for a new generation of leaders to step up and try to start fixing some of these problems and stop talking about them. We have some very serious issues to deal with, and we need serious people to deal with them.
Again, we had hoped to sit down with Tim Sheehy for a one-on-one interview, but he declined our invitation. And it's not just MTN. Outside of appearances on political talk radio shows, Sheehy has done just a handful of interviews over the past 6 months. However, just this past Monday, we did finally manage to speak with Mr. Sheehy after a rally in Columbus. While we were only allowed to ask 4 questions, the topic we discussed was an important one: education. At several campaign events, Sheehy has suggested getting rid of the U.S. Department of Education, arguing the move could save the country $30 billion. It's a bold proposal that, to our knowledge, no reporters have been able to ask Sheehy to explain.
Well, I'll tell you what it means. We have federal agencies that are far outside their writ. And I don't think we need a federal Department of Education telling our parents how they need to educate their kids. I think all the money we spend on funding bureaucracies in D.C. would be far more efficient being spent at the state level or county level. There's block grant options. And I think that's a solution for many of our federal departments that have become symbols of dysfunction. Our federal government is largely dysfunctional. That's just a fact. Look at our southern border. Look at our debt and deficit. Look at our lack of military readiness. Look at the amount we're spending on education and what we're getting for it, which our test scores are going down nationally. So the Department of Education is not a good investment right now. So we don't necessarily have to throw that money away. What we should be doing is looking how to reinvest that money in a more effective place, and that's in local education.
Sheehy isn't alone in calling for the abolishment of the Department of Education. Several other Republican candidates nationally have expressed similar thoughts, including former President Donald Trump, who vowed to eliminate the agency if he returns to office, calling the department an abuse of taxpayer dollars to indoctrinate America's youth. We've told you about Tim Sheehy's military service and his career battling wildfires throughout the western United States. What we haven't discussed are some of the political battles he's already had to fight. With more on that, here's MTN's Casey Conlon.
Been in about 93 countries around the world, carried a gun in a lot of them.
U.S. Senate candidate Tim Sheehy is no stranger to combat.
We didn't do one deployment, we went back again and again and again and again and again.
But he's already faced a few political battles he hasn't managed to win. Let's start here. Sheehy claims he received a gunshot wound during a 2012 firefight in Afghanistan. After first telling a park ranger the injury happened during a 2015 trip to Glacier when he accidentally dropped his pistol and it discharged. Sheehy later admitted that was a lie, saying he did it to try and protect his platoon mates because the injury may have come from friendly fire, and he claims he was never treated for the injury.
I've been wounded in combat.
But just last week, the park ranger who cited Sheehy with discharging his gun in Glacier told the New York Times he's 100% sure Sheehy did shoot himself that day. And a former Navy SEAL who served with Sheehy also told the paper that the two met in 2012 shortly after the alleged combat injury happened, but says Sheehy's arms showed no evidence of a bullet wound. It's still unclear what really happened. And then there's this.
Well, they're drunk at 8 a.m. and you're roping together.
Leaked audio from several campaign events reveals Sheehy making comments perpetuating Native American stereotypes, something that's outraged tribal leaders across the state.
I think that it's perpetuating old racist stereotypes, that of the outdated idea that the drunken Indian.
Those leaders have called repeatedly for an apology. Sheehy has not issued one.
As he comes out and continues to not want to say I'm sorry for something so serious, it really bothers me personally.
You ought to apologize for the statements you made about them that were totally inaccurate.
Yeah, insensitive. I come from the military, as many of our tribal members do. You know, we make insensitive jokes and probably off color sometimes. And you know, I'm an adult. I'll take accountability for that.
There are also other controversies. It was recently uncovered that Sheehy's book, called Mudslingers, appeared to be partly plagiarized.
There were 4 passages that were, I would say, questionable, if not outright plagiarism.
Sheehy's reputation as a successful business owner has also been challenged.
We've invested in growing our business here.
Public filings show Bridger Aerospace, the aerial firefighting company he founded in 2014, lost $77 million last year and $20 million in the first 3 months of this year. In a note to stockholders, Bridger's auditor said the company has suffered recurring losses that, quote, raise substantial doubt about its ability to continue. Sheehy resigned from Bridger Aerospace this summer.
Again, we have repeatedly tried to speak with Tim Sheehy about all of these topics in addition to his vision for Montana. While opportunities to speak with him have been few and far between, he's not the only candidate embracing this as a campaign strategy. Scripps News correspondent Maritza Giorgio sat down with Lee Banville and Sally Mock to talk more about this somewhat new approach to politics. Banville is the University of Montana political analyst, while Mock is one of the state's most tenured journalists.
This is one of the most closely watched races in the country this election cycle. I don't have to tell you two that because there's a lot at stake. And this race, among a handful of others, has the potential to shift the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. So when we talk about these decisions about strategy and whether to do interviews, participate in debates, even communicate with the press at all, do you think that's a Sheehy decision, or do you think that's being decided at a higher level? Let's start with you, Sally.
Oh, I suspect, start that again. I suspect, Maritza, that it's at a higher level because I think it's happening nationally. I don't think the Sheehy Tester race is an exception in terms of, blocking the legacy media, as we call it, out of their campaign. I think that's a national strategy. And I think it's a national strategy because it is effective in terms of what they want to accomplish, which is as little scrutiny as possible so they don't get, quote, in any kind of trouble for something they might say. And the problem, of course, is that there's no accountability and the public has no way to know for sure what they really think about something, what their background really entails, et cetera, except what they're fed by the campaigns. So I think it's an extremely dangerous and terrible trend in terms of the public's right to know and get the information they need in an election that is so important, one of the most important in the history of Montana politics, one could say.
And Lee, to Sally's point, the strategy seems to be working. If we look at the race for Senate, Sheehy has done almost no interviews with local news outlets, and he's ahead in the polls. So while journalists often defend their profession, do candidates need to take questions at all?
No. I mean, I think that, the age in which we were the gatekeeper of, access to the public, we were a necessary evil for politicians. They had to talk to us because they wanted us to convey their messages to the public. We are one of many voices that are contributing to coverage of these campaigns, plus the candidates can speak directly. And so we have become much more of like a liability, I think, to many politicians who have their own following. And so I think we've seen it, up and down the ballot in Montana, that it's much harder to get candidates to speak unless they're candidates who are struggling to gain attention or are behind in the polls. They're more than willing to talk. But the people who are comfortably ahead or feel like they're on the right trajectory and can do their messaging direct around us, see it as a totally logical strategy to follow.
So Sally, is the problem that they're not doing interviews, or is it that their base doesn't really seem to care?
I think their base doesn't seem to care, but I think that is something that should be discussed more in terms of what the base is losing, and not just the base, but the public in Montana, the voters in general, whether you support Sheehy or Tester or on the fence. None of you are getting the information that I think is crucial in terms of how you're going to elect someone who's going to represent you for the next 6 years in the U.S. Senate. And they may not care because they've been told that the media is the enemy, et cetera, and fake news and all of that. But what they're not thinking about is that all they're getting from the campaigns are slogans, not substance. And I think that's a very dangerous thing for however politics are going to be implemented and policy is going to be implemented in this country. And I think the press, I have to take some responsibility. We haven't made this point well enough. And I am happy that it's being discussed more now, but I think it's something that we've ignored too long, and we need to speak up about it and emphasize to the public what they're losing by agreeing to the, silently basically agreeing to this new normal of candidates and office holders not speaking to the press, period.
So Sally was my very first college journalism professor back when I was 18 years old. Lee, you spent 13 years at PBS NewsHour. You covered national politics for a long time, and now you are the director of the University of Montana School of Journalism. So what are you telling your students? What are they learning about how to navigate this when they're thrown out into the professional world?
Well, I mean, I think what Sally just said is really important, that the role of the media is oftentimes, from a political strategy point of view, it was how you reach your intended audience. But there's another role to the media, which is that we are the surrogates for the public who get to ask questions of these people in power or who want to be in power. And if it's thought of in that way, that it's really not about not talking to the press, it's really about not answering questions from the public. And yes, we are the ones who stand up first and say, hey, I'm here. I've gone to this meeting. I've interviewed your opponent. I've gone to all these rallies. And so I have some questions about what you're saying. But I'm doing that not for me. I'm doing that for the public who needs to know what your positions are or needs to know who you are as a leader before they cast their ballot. And so, that's still true. But I think we do have to do a better job of sort of making the argument that it's, talking to the press is not about the press. It's about the public having more information, having a better sense of who these people are, and being able to really, judge apples for apples by hearing them have to defend themselves, defend their policies of their party or the policies of their leadership, and also really, answer hard questions, because that's what they're going to do, in the case of the Senate for the next 6 years.
Okay, Sally Mock and Lee Banville, thank you so much for having this conversation and analysis with us. We appreciate it.
All eyes will certainly be on the race between Jon Tester and Tim Sheehy come election night. But there's also another candidate on the ballot. MTN's senior political reporter Jonathan Ambarian introduces us to Sid Dowd, Libertarian candidate asking for your vote.
In recent Montana elections, Libertarian candidates have often faced accusations that they'd be spoilers, potentially keeping another candidate from winning. Libertarian Sid Dowd, running for U.S. Senate, believes that characterization is unfair.
I did not consider what this might do to Jon Tester or Tim Sheehy when I'm running. I'm running because I want to change policy, and they're not going to do it, at least from what I see.
Dowd is the chair of the Montana Libertarian Party, the state's most successful third party. He works as a consultant for a company in the defense industry, and he's a Kalispell City Council member, a nonpartisan position. Dowd calls Tester and Sheehy good men, but says the two main parties need to change.
Every politician that runs for office in Montana, at some time during their campaign, they'll tell Montanans, I'm basically libertarian, or I have libertarian leanings, because that really plays here. Montana is one of the few states that actually understands maybe what a libertarian is.
In his campaign, Dowd has talked about reducing federal spending and debt, abolishing the Federal Reserve, and keeping the U.S. out of overseas conflicts.
Everything that I'm basically about is making sure that the dollar that's in your wallet is worth more, and that we're taking the lives of our children into consideration, especially when we start talking about the endless wars that we seem to be always engaged with.
Dowd says there's a barrier for third parties because people vote defensively against the candidate they don't like. But regardless of the results, he believes Montanans want an option like him.
The rational middle is fatigued because they keep having to support candidates that do things that they don't want, just because they don't want the other side more. And we're starting to see that fatigue come down to, well, I'm going to take a chance and vote for the third party, because even if they don't win, if they get a higher percentage, my voice is going to be heard.
There's also another third-party candidate on the ballot for Senate. Robert Barb of Darby is running as a Green Party candidate. MTN has repeatedly reached out to him but hasn't heard back. In Helena, Jonathan Ambarian, MTN News.
With Election Day drawing near, you may be wondering what the polls say about this race. Most show Tim Sheehy with a growing lead. Decisions Desk HQ, which is partnering with Scripps News for this election, gives Sheehy an 81% chance of winning in November. And a New York Times Siena College poll released last week shows the Republican leading Tester by 7 percentage points. A Sheehy win could have big implications as Republicans look to flip the U.S. Senate. Scripps News' Stephanie Liebergen has a closer look at which races will be the most closely watched by both parties when voters head to the polls.
With Election Day less than a month away, Democrats' odds of holding on to their slim Senate majority appear bleak. Of the 34 Senate seats up for re-election this year, Democrats are defending 23 of them. The GOP is all but guaranteed to flip West Virginia, the seat being vacated by Senator Joe Manchin. If Republicans can flip one more, they'll likely have the majority in January. In Montana, Democratic Senator Jon Tester was seen as a popular incumbent, but polls have Republican Tim Sheehy in the lead. Experts say the political climate and the strength of his opponent makes this election harder for Tester.
He's running in a presidential cycle that is increasingly difficult in a state that in 2020, President Trump won by 16 points. Tim Sheehy has been able to put his own money in the race, his profile as a veteran, as a Purple Heart recipient. I think just the political math and the lean of the state, political gravity takes over.
In Wisconsin, the race between Senator Tammy Baldwin and Republican Eric Hovde is now considered a toss-up by the Cook Political Report. Polls show Baldwin's lead is now within the margin of error.
Wisconsin's probably as close to an evenly divided 50-50 state as we have in the country. So I think this race was probably always going to tighten, and I think what we're seeing is just a nature of Wisconsin elections here.
Arizona may be a bright spot for Democrats as voters choose a replacement for Democrat-turned-independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Even though the race for president in the state is neck and neck, polls show Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego leading Republican Carrie Lake by as many as 13 points.
Carrie Lake is the type of candidate that Republicans had hoped to avoid. She ran for governor in 2022, lost a very close election, but she did lose, and she has refused to concede that, has continued to challenge it in court.
The challenging map for Democrats has them looking outside their typical stomping ground, and Texas might be Democrats' best chance to pick up a seat.
Ted Cruz had a bit of a scare in 2018 against Beto O'Rourke in that race that he won by less than 3 points. But there's two things that I think are different in Texas than it was in 2018. Abortion and Cancun.
Texas has one of the strictest abortion laws in the country, and reproductive rights can motivate voters to show up at the polls. And Democratic Representative Colin Allred has made Cruz's now infamous trip to Cancun while the state struggled with massive power outages a focus of his Senate campaign ads. Stephanie Liebergen, Scripps News, Washington.
Well, now we want to bring in Joe St. George, our Scripps Deputy Political Director in Washington, D.C., to talk more about how this race is being viewed outside of Montana. Good evening, Joe, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah. So, Joe, let's start there. This race, Tester Sheehy, has gotten a lot of attention since day one, but is that still the case with Tim Sheehy now leading by a larger margin? Is this race still even considered a toss-up?
Oh, I think so. I think Washington believes a few things, and one is that Tester can win tough elections, and Washington also believes that it's really hard to poll in Montana. I mean, I can't tell you how many pollsters I've talked to about the state of polling right now in our country. First off, it's harder to poll everywhere. People just don't answer those landlines, right? So you need a combination of the internet, you need a combination of cell phone numbers. But Montana in particular is, of all the major states that we're watching, either for the presidential or the Senate, it's just a tough one to poll. That being said, I think everyone believes that the Republicans have the advantage here, that Sheehy has the advantage here. I'm not trying to suggest that the polls are being misleading in any way, but there is this sense, certainly among senators that our Scripps News reporters have spoken with in recent days and weeks, that Tester could pull it out. That being said, it's important to remember why the country's watching Montana. They're watching Montana because control of the U.S. Senate is at stake. What does the Senate do? They confirm secretaries for whoever the next president's going to be. They confirm Supreme Court justices if there would be a vacancy. They can be a check on the president. So control of the Senate matters a lot in an election year. I think the presidential race always sucks up a lot of oxygen, but the Senate race is really going to dictate how much the next president is going to be capable of doing. It's a 51-49 Senate right now. West Virginia is basically, Democrats have conceded that race. They're going to be represented by a Republican next year. So it's 50-50, and that means Democrats can't lose a single place that they're defending a seat to maintain the majority, and that means they can't lose the state of Montana, Tim.
All right. Well, Joe, what realistic chance do Democrats have at this point to maintain that majority in the Senate?
Well, our partners at DDHQ, the MTN News, Montana News Network, Scripps News, we've partnered with DDHQ to help with our election forecasting and modeling. They'll help us call races on election night. Right now, they say Republicans have north of a 70% chance of winning control of the United States Senate right now. That's one of the highest margins that they've had this entire cycle. So as we chat just a few days before the election, Republicans have the advantage, and that's because they're looking at Montana, they're looking at Ohio, they're looking at Wisconsin, and they're saying, man, it's going to be tough for Democrats to run the table in all three of those states. That being said, and we've heard from Senator Tester, MTN News covered Senator Tester for years. There's something in his soul that believes he can win close elections, but if there was ever a time in which he was going to go down, it just might be here in 2024.
All right. Well, at this point, how important are fundraising numbers? What do those numbers tell us?
My, oh my, has so much money been pouring into this race, right? I know somebody's watching us right now saying, I am sick of all these commercials. That's all I see on my TV. I get it. I'm always, I make my job's in TV, right? We work in TV. I don't want to criticize commercials too much. They help pay our paycheck. But the reality is that for the vast majority of Montanans, the vast majority of Americans in swing states, at this stage of the cycle, they're tired of the commercials, and the commercials are a direct result of all of the money that's flowed in. Tester's raised north of $30 million. Cash was never a problem here. They've spent that not just on commercials, but also on staff, on internal polling that we don't necessarily get to see all the time. But remember, campaigns are doing their own internal polling, which is very expensive in Montana, to get a sense of, okay, do we need to spend more time in Bozeman? Do we need to spend more time in Billings? Where should we be directing our resources in the final stretch of the campaign? This Senate race in Montana is shattering records when it comes to money. But that's really just the state of our elections right now in terms of just how much money is allowed to flow into our elections, and as a result, how many commercials get produced to appear on stations like this.
Yeah. Well, Joe, the Republican in this race, Tim Sheehy, he's a political newcomer, never held office before.
Yeah.
So how unusual is that to jump right into a race as high profile as this one?
I think if we were talking 50 years ago, we would say it's pretty unusual. But now, a lot of political strategists say it's an advantage. If you don't have a record, right, what is one thing we see Republicans attack Tester on? They attack him on a lot of votes that he may have done 10 years ago, 5 years ago, right? The longer you are in Washington, the more of a record you have that then your opponent can use against you. In this case, there is a record with Mr. Sheehy, of course, his private sector experience, his life before deciding to want to be a politician, but it's not as concrete as, let's say, a voting record in the United States Senate. And we have seen in recent years, Republicans especially, excel with producing candidates who don't have political experience to then win some pretty big offices. Think of the governor of Virginia, political novice, never held office before. Think of Donald Trump. He never was a governor or a senator. He just became president. So we are in this era in which the American people, the electorate, seems to be rewarding inexperience with politics as opposed to, let's say, a few decades ago where experience would be more rewarded.
All right. Well, Joe, we thank you so much for your analysis leading up to the election. We look forward to hearing from you and hearing your thoughts on election night and even after the election. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good to see you.
And we do want to thank you for joining us tonight for our special America Votes, Montana's Race for the U.S. Senate. If you missed any of our coverage, you can find all of our interviews right now on our MTN websites. Just click on the MTN Politics at the top of the page. On behalf of Andrea Lutz and all of us at MTN, I'm Tim McGonigal. Good night, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching America Votes, Montana's Race for the U.S. Senate, a special presentation from MTN News.